Good morning, backyard friends. It's Friday morning. It's 9 o'clock. That means Backyard Naturalist is here live, as it is almost every Friday morning. Welcome. It's the day after Halloween, which means it's November, which is a fantastic month during the most fantastic time of year, in my opinion. And outside my window, I see the golden leaves of the maple tree, and I'm also in a room with two very large and two very hidden bags of candy collected by my two little cherubs, Henry and Cece. And those bags are not at all the source of any friction related to the amount of candy my kids would like to eat and the amount of candy I would like them to eat. And so here we are, the day after Halloween, with an episode on the source of that friction, which is sugar, along with the coffee plant, the chocolate plant, the sugar plant, or plants, as we will see, is one of the most influential plants in the world, arguably the most influential plant. And so we're gonna get into sugar. We'll let the sugarcane plant and its friends speak for themselves in episode 8 of season 6 of the Backyard Naturalist, searching for sugar. Man, yes, I all I did for this cover slide is insert a comma, turning Searching for Sugar Man, which is a really good movie that I highly recommend, into Searching for Sugar Man. And I'm not all ashamed at that. And as always, with a nod to PBS, I'd really like to send a heartfelt thank you to viewers like yourself, those of you with us live, and anyone who might be watching this on YouTube. You are not alone. I'm here with you, and I'm excited and honored to share this time with you. Also, super appreciative of the Backyard Naturalist subscribers who are here with us and keep this program sustainable. Thank you for your additional support. We have our annual potluck party coming up soon in December. Details will make their way to you, and we are super grateful, as always, for your support. If you'd like to know more about the benefits of a subscription, annual, seasonal, or super, contact any member of the research team of the Urban Ecology Center. I'm also super excited to let you know that the UEC's research team is bringing another learning opportunity to the community. We will be presenting a winter ecology course, which will be Wednesday evenings in February, part classroom, part outside learning, college level, but without the homework and the tests. And information on the course and how to register will be coming to an Urban Ecology Center website near you. And mark your calendars for February 1st. That will, fingers crossed, be the official reopening of the newly renovated Urban Ecology Center of Washington Park. We'll be celebrating Winterfest, and you can get a sneak peek of the new building, the new classroom that we will use for the winter ecology course, along with other great features of the renovated building. I won't give any surprises. We'll let you see them for yourselves. So come for Winterfest and then come back to take the winter ecology course. Very quickly keeping tabs of all the ways our backyards are connected to the skies and space. I do have to tell you, I am going to insert this really quickly. Recent events remind me also how potentially dangerous it is when we rely on private companies headed by individuals to do our work, which includes very sensitive information that could be commandeered for political reasons. Um, Happy to talk about that one over a beer sometime. But the European Space Agency's Hera mission successfully launched and sent back some really cool photos of the Earth and the Moon. So if the Earth had if the Earth had an arm that was 1 million miles long, this could be its selfie photobombing the moon. But this is taken from 1 million miles away by the Hera mission, and this will be exploring the binary asteroid systems Didymus and Dimorphos. Also, the Europa Clipper mission got off to a good start, and that's going to explore whether conditions for life could be supported on some of Jupiter's moons. And then there's another really fun meteor shower to look for as the Orionids are now past their peak, and the Leonids are about to peak in the middle of November, 16th, 17th. And they are known for how fast the meteors are, 44 miles per second. That's hard to really even think about. But long, bright tails emanating from Leo. Unfortunately, it coincides with a full moon this year, so it won't be as spectacular, but just about any night you're out, keep an eye out for meteors. And then, of course, I do want to reference the shows that I use very frequently for the Backyard Naturalist, How Stuff Works and the Stuff You Should Know, uh, Ologies by Ali Ward, the Birdjoy podcast, which just began season 2 last week, and I'm really looking forward to listening to that again. So, on with the show. The sweet, sweet show that comes from this very ordinary looking plant, the sugar cane. And we do get a little meta when we talk about sugar because there is a sugar plant, and then there's also sugar, which isn't just a molecule, it explains a whole suite of molecules. It's a category. So it when you're saying sugar, you can say a lot of different things, or you can be, call your bestie sugar or honey. Um, Sugar, the plant, is full of sugar, the molecules, but all the plants, all life has sugar in them. Every single plant has sugar in it, and any animal that eats a plant has sugar in them, or an animal that eats another animal has sugar in them. But if we got to start somewhere, so we'll start with the plant that it's named for, or vice versa, and where it lies in the tree of life. It's a plant. It's a vascular flowering plant. It's a monocot, which means the seeds only have one embryonic leaf, like the grasses, of which sugar cane is a member. It's in the second largest subfamily of grasses, the Panicoideae, along with corn, which we have previously featured on here when we did the Maze Runner. And then we also did a mini feature on switchgrass when we looked at biofuels. So you can kind of see how much the sugar cane looks like its relatives, corn and switchgrass, even though corn has been bred by humans to look completely different from its ancestor. And so to learn a little bit more about the ancestral history of sugar, you can go to the corn episode. And most of it is pretty much the same until we get to, of course, genus and species. So it's not a surprise that the genus of sugarcane is Saccharum, and then the species is Saccharum officinarum. All of the grasses in the genus Saccharum are considered sugar canes. There is not one species of sugar cane. And because it's been so important to humans, there's been a lot of interbreeding, a lot of hybridization. We saw that with guinea pigs too, over the thousands of years that humans have been cultivating the plant. 70% of the sugar worldwide today, though, comes from this one species, Saccharum officinarum. And it's hybrids. So it's pretty hard to find the original. You can still find the ancestral plant, but it gets pretty muddled by all the hybridization that goes on. So, it looks like corn. Um, but sugar cane is one of just a few players that gives us the lovely addictive sweetener sugar in production today. And so a surprise to me is that there is another huge player in the sugar world. And so this is going to be kind of a twofer today because there is also the sugar beet. And this part of it was new to me. And this gets crazy fast because the sugar beet is a cultivar of something called the sea beet. And so the botanical name of sea beet is Beta vulgaris, and vulgar means common, like Sturnus vulgaris, the common starling. So this is the common beta plant. So it's not rude or unrefined, it's just common. And then from this one plant, the sea beet, so this is the I guess type, the species from which we get the sugar beet, Beta vulgaris, but all just like in pumpkins is a type of species that is a cultivar of the squash. And so pumpkins, zucchinis, winter squash, summer squash, acorn squash, they're all the same species, even though they look very differently from each other. And it's the same with the beet, the sea beet. We have gotten cultivars from the sea beet that have produced the regular old beet that we use from the grocery store, as in addition to the sugar beet and Swiss chard. They're the same plant. They're just, cultivated differently. So you can see that when you look at the leaves of the beets and the leaves of the chard, you can start to see some of the similarities. When you look at the stalks, they look very similar, but all the same species of plant. So, and you can hear more about the pumpkin uh, family tree in As Gourd as It Gets, which is also on YouTube. The sugar you get from beet sugar. So you might be saying, why are we bringing in beet sugar? Because I just like my sugar, my good old sugar cane sugar. But the sugar you get from beet sugar is at its finest level completely indistinguishable from the sugar you get from sugar cane when it's ultra refined with enough processing because it's the same chemically. And with the processing, you're going to get the same chemical and it will taste exactly the same, whether it comes from the sugar cane or the beet sugar. But any version that's less processed, refined palates can start to taste the differences between the two based on trace nutrients from the original plants. The less refined you get, the differences become more distinct. So beet sugar and cane sugar are very different in their unrefined forms, but as you refine them, they become more and more similar to each other. And beet sugar also doesn't have the molasses that the cane sugar does. But 70% of all sugar today worldwide comes from that one species, Saccharum officinarum, and its hybrids. 20% of all sugar worldwide comes from the beetroot, and then 10% comes from other species of sugarcane. So there's a complex history of sugar. There's different kinds of sugars that we'll talk about at the end. But in the sugarcane story, it's believed that Saccharum officinarum, and for the sake of simplicity in my own mouth, I'm going to start referring to that species as sugarcane. Again, all members of that genus are types of sugarcane, but the modern sugarcane was likely bred from an ancestral kind of tiger-striped sugarcane called Saccharum robustum, or the robust cane. You use that a lot, use that in coffee, the Robusta. This is the robust cane. And this originated in, very likely in New Guinea and has been cultivated for 8,000 years for that sweet, sweet sugar. It was cultivated and bred for properties that humans liked, just as we did for corn and wheat and potatoes and squash, tomatoes, apples. As sugarcane grew in popularity, it spread, and because it started on an island, it was basically island hopping throughout Polynesia. And as new people were introduced to sugarcane and the processes, they started hybridizing it with other species of cane native to their areas, likely. That's how the story went. It then spread from Polynesia over to Indonesia, and then kind of hit a major breakthrough once it made its way to India, because India was a huge nexus of the trade routes throughout Asia. And so sugar spread very quickly to Persia, to Western Europe during the Crusades. And then it was brought to America eventually by Columbus, where it fueled the brutal slave trade and became an agent for slavery because it was deemed a very precious commodity known as white gold. People wanted it, people needed it, people were making a lot of money off it, and people were dying and becoming subjugated because of it. For a long time, therefore, sugar was a treat for the royalty, for the very rich, for people that could afford it. It was highly prized and with a limited supply. So again, it was very difficult to get, but very sought after. And that slowly began to change around the year 1300. Companies in Venice started to really perfect the refining process and the process of producing large quantities of sugar. So in 1310, you have the first major sugar exchange between Venice and England. And in that exchange, there were 50 tons of sugar traded from Venice to England on boats, and it was sold for an amount that in today's dollars would be $11 million. If you took that same amount of sugar today, 50 tons of sugar, it would sell for about $20,000. So 11 million back then, 20,000. That's one of the ways we know, I mean, how much sugar has become more available. But no matter how you look at it, it's in a massive exchange worth a lot of money. And then in England, it's still going to those who can afford it, but the supplies are starting to increase and the prices are starting to go down, and more people are able to purchase sugar. Oddly enough, another world event, or in particular in Britain, had a major impact on the available of sugar locally, which was the Reformation, because the Reformation resulted in the closing of many monasteries, and in those monasteries, a lot of the British honey production was happening. Monks often kept bees, so when they closed the monasteries, that meant a huge reduction in the supply of honey, and the demand for sweeteners for the tea goes up, and people are able to turn to sugar, and then that leads us to where we are today. One of the most impactful British events, a huge increase in the consumption of tea made possible by the sugar. So this is when tea starts to become the national drink of Great Britain. But Great Britain was involved in a lot of wars, especially around 1800, late 1790s, early 1800s, and they were good at making naval blockades, and that meant that a lot of sugar that they really wanted was not able to make its way into Britain, where it was in very high demand because sugarcane is a tropical plant and you can't grow it in Britain, but you can grow the sugar beet in Britain. And so that also led to the increase of sugar from the sugar beet plant. And so during times when sugar from sugarcane wasn't available, mainly because of the naval blockades, more and more Brits were turning to sugar from the beet, and it does grow there just fine. Kind of like countries that are trying to find domestic oil so they're not relying on foreign oil. And there's a whole lot of informative resources out there, videos, podcasts, books about how sugar has impacted world history. I touched on this just a tiny bit because I'm focusing more on the botanical and biological side of sugar, but you get a sense of how quickly sugar spread around the world because we love it. And today, sugarcane is grown in just about every tropical and subtropical environment that it can. So South America, Central America, even up into the southern United States, the Caribbean, different parts of Africa, India, Southeast Asia, Northeast Australia, the main major cane growing areas. And this slide shows the much expanded reach of sugar when you consider both the cane and beet producing sugar industries. And obviously, Alaska doesn't produce sugar cane, but it's part of a country that does. So it's kind of a misleading part of the map. But you can see that when you add the two, beet and sugar cane, sugar is produced just about everywhere in the world. And the thing is, all plants have sugar in them. It's not just beets and cane. All plants produce sugar through photosynthesis or other methods. But the reason that cane and beets are the winners in this is that they have the highest amounts of sugar in their bodies, much higher than other plants. So technically, if you really wanted to get sugar, you could get pure sugar from the grass in your backyard. It would just the amount of energy you'd have to do to get probably just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of sugar would not be worth it. It's similar to how all maple trees, including box elder, produce sap that you can get maple syrup from, but the percentage of sugar in sugar maple trees is much higher, and that's why we use maple trees for sugar. But technically, you can get sugar from any plant, but the beet and cane have the highest percentages of sugar ounce for ounce. And that's why, from an industry perspective, these are the plants that we use today to make sugar. Sugar cane is about 10% sugar, and sugar beet is even higher at about 17% of the plant is sugar. It's a smaller plant. And so you can see not only is sugar important to all life, it's also powering industry to a massive degree around the world. And I don't even know how to wrap my head around these numbers. look like numbers that are really big. And plus, they're in metric tons, which is like 200-ish pounds more than our tons. But I think you can look at this and see that sugar production is massive worldwide. And this compares beet sugar and cane sugar. And when this came out a couple of years ago, the world had just gone from a deficit of sugar to a surplus of sugar. People pay attention to this stuff. And then you can see which countries produce the most sugar. So a lot of it from Brazil and India, and the importance of that we'll talk about a little bit later. I like this graph because it shows that sugar production continues to increase worldwide. And again, we're talking about a crop that's been in production for 8,000 years. But it also shows that the percentage of sugar produced from cane is slowly increasing as well. So you're still getting a lot from beets, but a slow and steady growth in percentage of cane production. But that still means that both cane and beet sugar production continue to grow a lot. So why do humans use and need sugar besides filling these stupid Halloween bags with candy? I shouldn't, when I was their age, I was just as addicted too. But just like salt, we talked about a few weeks ago, sugar is important and necessary to our bodies. We need it. Without it, we would not survive. We need sugar to function, primarily for energy. And sugars are complex. They're literally complex sugars, but figuratively as a topic, it's also very complex. So the simplest form of sugar is a monosaccharide, and it comes naturally as a byproduct of photosynthesis in plants to produce glucose. Glucose is the most abundant form of sugar in nature, produced by plants and algae, and it's produced from water and carbon dioxide with the help of the sun's energy and has a very important byproduct of oxygen. So glucose is the simplest, the most abundant, and it's more complicated than that, but also the least harmful for your body. Necessary and least harmful. When we ingest glucose, our pancreas releases insulin into the bloodstream, and insulin is important because insulin turns all of your cells into little sugar factories. It allows all of our cells to process the glucose that we ingested, says invites the glucose inside and turns it into ATP for energy. So we need sugar to live, we need glucose, and the insulin helps our body use that glucose. Some organisms, plants, will further process glucose into other monosaccharides like fructose, and then more complex sugars after that. When they make fructose, fructose really likes to combine with sucrose. So the two of them, when they're together, they're going to combine pretty readily, and that makes sucrose. So, sorry, fructose combines with glucose. All plants make glucose, then they make fructose. The fructose combines with glucose to make sucrose. Sucrose is that purified table sugar. When you have the white processed table sugar, you are eating sucrose, half glucose, half fructose, 1-to-1 ratio, 50% of each. Fructose isn't processed as easily by your body. So in the liver, fructose needs to be broken down into the glucose that your body can use. Your liver can basically do one of three things with the fructose that it gets from the sucrose. First, it can break it down into glucose, which is what your body wants to use. That's the best case scenario. If there's an excess of fructose, too much for the liver to handle, then the liver starts converting the sugar into fats. And it can either put those fats into the bloodstream, where they become triglycerides, or they can convert that into fatty deposits in the liver, and you can start to build up fats in the liver, the belly, other parts of your body. That's what happens with the excess fructose. The energy, they can't use it now. We're storing it for future use. This is the main reason why high fructose corn syrup can be so bad for your body. High fructose corn syrup is 55% fructose, the one we don't want as much, and 45% glucose, which means it's harder for your body to process immediately, and it's much more likely that your body will turn it into fat because the liver becomes overwhelmed much more quickly. It's working overtime when you have that excess fructose. Also, because high fructose corn syrup is a syrup, it moves through your system much faster. It hits the liver much faster. When you eat fructose, which is also in apples, it takes a lot longer for your body to absorb it and then make its way to your liver. So it's a time release, but the high fructose corn syrup hits your liver immediately. And that can be a problem, particularly when you're in excess. And the worldwide data shows that obesity epidemics coincide pretty well with the introduction of high fructose corn syrups into areas. FYI, I am simplifying these processes. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physiologist, but for the sake of the stories of sugar, these are the cliff notes. And so again, I'm not offering any medical advice, but an excess of any kind of sugar is going to be bad, whether it's glucose, fructose, but processed sugars like high fructose corn syrup, added sugars are likely much worse for your body. There are a whole lot of ailments and negative effects. I'm not going to get into them for time, but also gets depressing. But it is important to know that eating too much sugar, overwhelming your liver, can have a ton of negative effects on your body. One of the biggest problems is that too much fructose in particular can bring about something called metabolic syndrome. Your body becomes so overwhelmed that its insulin system just kind of goes haywire. It's like the constant presence of insulin just, it's like enough is enough. And then people with metabolic syndrome are more likely to have insulin resistance. The insulin isn't as effective as it should be. Their cells have a harder time responding to insulin, turning the sugar into energy. And then this can lead to type 2 diabetes, where your insulin processing systems just become much less effective. Sometimes you're also not able to produce enough insulin. You have to start injecting insulin into your body to help your body. And in addition to causing obesity, it causes heart attacks. In fact, metabolic syndrome is likely the number one contributor to heart attacks. We have often, as a society in the media, focused on fats, particular highly saturated fats, as being the bad food. And there are problems with a diet high in saturated fats, but it's likely sugar is even worse, even a worse perpetrator for heart disease. This is usually preventable through diet and exercise. Anytime I go to my doctor with anything, she asks me, "Are you getting enough exercise? Are you eating right?" In our culture, this can be hard to implement healthy habits. Often we need support. And but these are the important things to try to consider. And I will focus on one more negative effect of sugar, since I'm probably not the only one with huge bags of candy in my house. It's one we learn about from an early age, and that is sugar is bad for your teeth. Why is sugar bad for your teeth? In your mouth, just by itself, it's really not. But in your mouth, sugars begins to be broken down right away, and glycoproteins are one of the products. The glycoproteins are just love to stick to your teeth. They'll stick to the film that's already there, they'll stick to your teeth. Again, and then that still isn't the problem, having the glycoprotein stuck to your teeth, but your mouth is also full of lots and lots of microorganisms, including bacteria. And there's one particular bacteria, Streptococcus mutans, that really loves to eat those glycoproteins that are left behind by the sugar and stuck to your teeth. Still not a problem yet. The problem comes from when the bacteria start eating the glycoproteins, because they're essentially pooping out lactic acid. Lactic acid is what begins to wear down the enamel on your teeth. And it's not just that they're producing lactic acid, the bacteria themselves produce a biofilm for their own protection, and then that biofilm layer essentially traps the lactic acid onto your teeth, where then it will continue to erode the enamel, and then you get cavities. And it's not just the problems with your teeth, gum disease, and there's other systemic problems that you really don't want to mess with. And so that's why sugar is really bad for your teeth. And those are the scary stories related to sugar. There are also a lot of beautiful and important sugars stories. They are the molecules that allow us to be alive. Let's go back to All organisms need sugar. All plants have sugar. All plants need sugar for their own growth. And sometimes plants produce sugar for other reasons besides their own growth and maintenance. So apple tree becomes generous, says, I'm going to make some sugar for my friends. You'll love the recipe. This apple tree says, here, bee, sip on the sweet nectar. And then the bee takes that nectar to its hive, where Josh Clark said it's going to vomit it up and make the honey we enjoy. And then the same tree a few weeks later says, here, Basil, take this sweet apple made from my best sugar and turn it into a Waldorf salad for your guests. So the plants are being totally altruistic here. This apple tree is getting something from both of these interactions. It's giving sugar to the bees, but the bees helping it pollinate it. It essentially becomes an external sex organ for the plant. And then, of course, anytime you take an apple away from the tree and you throw the core away or compost it, it's going to help disperse the apple seeds and let the young apples grow up. So sugar is an important part of all of the processes of plants, not just internally, but through their partners. And then there's a sugar that they bring up, Josh and Clark in Chuck in the podcast that's called xylose, which may sound familiar. I'm sorry, this is uh, not that. My slides are mixed up. This is a slide showing that the humans have a very strange relationship with cows, and we like to drink their breast milk, which has additional sugars like lactose and galactose. And depending on your ancestry, you may have a difficult time producing or processing these sugars as well. But now here's the xylose. Xylose is found in wood and straw. And what's interesting about xylose is that the sugar that it produces, xylitol, which is a sugar alcohol, is super sweet, but it also circumvents the body's metabolic sugar processing centers. So in theory, xylose or xylitol could become very important from a health perspective if it doesn't have the same negative effects of the other sugars. There still are other negative effects. I think if you have it too much, it can produce diarrhea and other things. But from a metabolic process, there could be some really important. And the gum industry has already found this out because it's xylitol is in many gums as a sweetener. The problem is it's highly toxic to your dog, so you have to be very careful anytime you have xylitol. But xylitol is essentially sugar that you get from wood or straw. And then a lot of different types of sugar, not only from the sources and the kinds, but the grain sizes. So the finest, if you take the pure sugar, the table sugar, the sucrose, and you grind the crystals down to the finest grains, that's confectioner sugar or powdered sugar. There is a medium grind sugar used in baking called castor sugar. And apparently you can make that in your coffee grinder. If you just take regular table sugar, put it in your coffee grinder, you can get castor sugar. And then the granulated or table sugar that we most commonly are in contact with. There's also a preserving sugar that's really chunky. The crystals are really big. It's like a rock salt or a coarse sea salt. And just like with those rock salts, these rock sugar or the preserving sugars or the rock sugars are also used as a preservative. So it allows jams to last a long time. It's a preservative just like salt. Sometimes sugar is added to baking or other things to change the texture of foods, not just for sweetening. So foods like meringue, it enables to get them that meringue texture. The processing with sugar allows ice creams to become more creamy, and it's even used in meat as a tenderizer. A lot of humans love sugar because it accelerates the fermentation process to make alcohol. And sugar has become a very important player in the biofuel industry. So we covered this a little bit with switchgrass. A lot of work has been done with switchgrass. We're here in Wisconsin. We know a lot about how corn is used as a fuel, ethanol from corn. But sugar-based ethanol produces about 800 times more energy ounce for ounce than corn. So the potential from fuel from sugar is way higher than corn. In 2008, Brazil was able to produce half of its domestic fuel from sugar-based ethanol. So a lot of promise, looking like a very viable option in the energy industry. In fact, there's even a new process that looks at a different way for, this is crazy, for a different way for sugar to make energy. There are microorganisms that feed on sugar, but in the process, and I'm gonna try my best. In the process, it separates electrons, and then those electrons can easily be picked up and put into an electric current. So you're essentially using the bacteria and sugar to create an electric current that can be used to power. When the electrons and the current reaches the end, they attach and become water molecules. So it's essentially turning sugar into power and pure water. Pure sugar, pure water, power. And the the bacteria are the fuel. So potentially very clean, potentially very efficient. But all of these, just like corn, just like switchgrass, has a downside. And in sugar in particular, if you remember from the slide, so much sugar is produced in Brazil, so much produced sugar is produced in India, and it becomes deforestation becomes a huge issue with sugar. And particular places like the Amazon, that sugar is valuable not only now as a food or a sweetener, but also as a potential source of energy, and that drives up has so there's social implications, a lot of social implications, mainly how the workers are treated, because anytime you have an industry like this and hugely profitable, you just know that the people are going to suffer, whether it's wages or how they're treated. But also then you have driving up the other consequences. You're driving up the prices of sugar for everybody else too, and then you on top of that you have the deforestation, which is a real problem in the case of sugar. So a lot of potential as a biofuel, but also a really, really negative side that needs to be taken care of. So um, that's sugar. I didn't have time to go into all the types of sugars. Sugarcane also has molasses, which produces the brown sugars, the turbinado sugars. The sugar that I have in my coffee this morning, courtesy of our friend Claire in Colombia, is panela, which is unrefined cane sugar that has a very strong, but in my opinion, delicious flavor. Not everybody loves it. You can find canela both in, if you go to grocery stores, you can find them in cakes that are very, very hard, compact cakes. And you can also find them in more sugar form where it's ground, and it's really, really delicious in my opinion. I love it in coffee, maybe only second to maple syrup in my as my coffee sweetener or tea sweetener of choice. So not all sugars are the same. There are health benefits. It tastes delicious. It's been so important to humanity that we have taste buds that bind perfectly to the molecular structure of sugar. And it's important really just to pay attention to what you're putting in your body and how much. And if you can try to move your body, get exercise, eat fiber, eat vegetables. One of the benefits, of course, of going trick-or-treating with my kids is that I don't stuff my face with candy like I did when I was 7. And if I did, I would really feel the effects of it. But there is something called a papa tax that if you don't know about it, you should know about it. Also known as a mama tax or a grandparent tax or a friend tax or basically any adult tax or even a kid tax, but it's a small percentage that you are allowed when you take anybody trick or treating, and it does give you that little sugar fix. And that sugar, it's a sweetener, but at the end of the day, it's a plant. It's a grass. Sugar is a grass, and of course, a root. We didn't forget you. And these are two plants that at the end of the day have become extremely successful through their adaptations, and they're not much different from other grasses, other roots, but in their financial planning, they decided to invest a little more of their own body into sugar, and because of that, they have spread around the world and become extremely successful plants. So, thanks for joining me today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.